It's still very complicated. Just to start at the end of the story for a second, it's a kind of an informal requirement of all Israeli high schools that at some point, like usually in 11th grade or 12th grade, the kids take a trip to Poland. And it's usually it's privately funded by the parents. They pay for their kids to go. And, you know, some kids go, some kids don't go, but it's kind of part of a rite of passage of Israeli high school life. And we went to each of the parent meetings for each of our kids as they were getting ready to go to Poland. And there's obviously, there were people in each class, in each of our kids' 3 classes, where there were parents who said, my kid's not going. And it's not because some people said, I'm not giving the Poles my money. You know, they killed my grandparents, I'm not sending my money back there. You can't argue with that. But there were a lot of people who said, that's not the issue. They said, here's the thing. Because the teachers would say it's going to be a powerful experience, it's going to be a life-altering experience, they're going to come back and appreciate Israel in a whole new way. And some parents said, it's just not possible. That we are living here in our own sovereign land, and you, a professional educator, are telling me the only way to make them really appreciate this country is to send them to the country where they murdered 90% of the Jews. It was a kind of a principled thing. So that the battle about the place of the Shoah in Israeli life and thought is still very much alive. Now, Israelis have trouble grappling with it, just like Americans have trouble grappling with it. I mean, Americans don't really talk about it until Elie Wiesel, who passed away not long ago, writes Night. I mean, that opens up the floodgates. And it didn't happen in this country because the survivors didn't really want to talk about it. Elie Wiesel kind of gives them both permission and almost a command to begin talking about it. Now, in Israel, the survivors didn't want to talk about it either, but it's even more complicated because the Israelis who'd been in Palestine before the Shoah didn't want to hear about it. Because Israel and Zionism was about creating this new Jew. It was the Jew who was not the victim anymore. It was the Jew in those posters that are actually in the book, you know, with the brawny, bronzed, angular men and women. Literally in those posters, the men and women look almost identical, which is not, you know, whatever. But it makes a point. This was not about gender. It was about refashioning the human being. And these people who came straggling out of the camps, you know, in these striped shirts, emaciated, were the exact opposite of the Jew that the Zionists in the 20s and 30s who were draining the swamps and building the cities wanted to create. They were ashamed of them. And they didn't want to talk about them. And Israel's come a long way since the Eichmann trial in embracing them, except that I think it's important to point out, and I do point this out in the book, not completely embracing them. There are still lots of survivors of the Holocaust who are now in their 80s and 90s who live way under the poverty line. And it's an abomination. I mean, whatever you want to say about Israel's budget, there is enough money there to give basic sustenance to the people who saw the worst possible behavior that human beings are capable of. And so Israel still grapples with it, and there's a way in which, you know, the Holocaust, the Shoah, animates Israel, and is a kind of it's the epitome of the phenomenon that leads to Zionism. We talked about that whole anti-Semitism thing before. But there's a way in which it also ossifies you. When you see the entire world as Nazis in potentia, every enemy out there would just really like to round you up. It can ossify you, and you can find yourself unable to move. And that's also part of what's happening in Israel. I don't want to mention the person, but there's a senior member of the Israeli cabinet now, in whose office I was not that long ago, who has but one picture on his wall in his office. And it's that picture of the little boy in the Warsaw Ghetto with his hands in the air. This is a person who was born in Israel, right? I mean, that's not true, but was born after the Shoah. When that's the only picture in your office, you're saying something about the Jewish condition that I think actually Zionism was meant to undo. And yet